I'm about to tell you the story of the Great Scarlet Woman. If you stay tuned through the whole story, in the end, I'm going to share with you what this represents in real life. In the heart of Eden, deep in the African cradle of civilization, where two mighty rivers embrace to bring life to open grasslands and dense forests, an ancient civilization once flourished. The nourishing waters of the powerful flowing rivers are laden with silt and nutrients from the nearby mountains, hills, and valleys. This gives the rivers the mystical appearance of blood from the nearby ochre cliffs and canyons which enrich it. Like major arteries carrying blood to our body, the rivers bring sustenance and life to the land and its people, creating an abundance of wild and cultivated fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and grains for the sprawling village, which was over 30,000 strong at its height. Everything the people needed was provided for them, everything perfectly intact and whole. The forest provided the healing wisdom of medicines, fruits, nuts, seeds, and fibers. The culture was able to thrive, reaching the pinnacle of evolutionary heights in every field, from astronomy to agriculture, medicine, wild foraging, architecture, and the sciences. The men and women were muscular, lean, agile, energetic, and powerful. Their diet was so harmonious and intricately interwoven with the natural world around them, and their lifestyle so active and healthy. Their relationships and marriages were sensual, deeply bonding, and intuitive, due to their ancient monogamous practices of sensual intimacy and lovemaking called tantrika or tantra. The partners of this ancient civilization were so highly evolved in their healthy intimacy, bonding, and sexual practices within their relationships and marriages that they could read each other's minds and finish each other's sentences. They were raised, taught, and encouraged to regularly practice conscious communication, as well as secure attachment signaling to each other through deep eye gazing, embracing, listening, honoring, respecting, sensual touching, whispering, singing, caressing, holding, embracing, and a tantric style of lovemaking which moved in a beautifully choreographed dance of immensely satisfying and rewarding intimacy. The men retained their semen during lovemaking, and the women experienced powerful orgasms, which was unleashed like the immensity and ferocity of the two mighty rivers. Partners regularly harnessed, maintained, and fortified a powerful and deep bond. They were so immensely satisfied and completely occupied with each other that they yearned for no other. The divorce epidemic plaguing modern society was unheard of, thanks to the preventative and protective healthy sexual behaviors which were deeply instilled in the heart of this beautiful ancient culture. In this veritable heaven on earth and this highly successful utopian civilization, a delicate and harmonious dance had been cultivated, harnessed, and perfected for millennia. The people consciously honored and respected themselves, their partners, their community, nature, and true health on a body, mind, and soul level. The people sought communication, connection, and harmony with God in everything they did, while gaining clarity, purpose, and approval from God before they did it. Because of their deeply intimate, personal, and powerful partnership with God, they received an endless source of inspiration, courage, drive, determination, willpower, discipline, satisfaction, joy, self-love, health, and empowerment, welling up like the two mighty rivers from the most sacred chambers of their heart and soul. The wise elders in the village held customary rite of passage ceremonies with the young men and women, passing down the myth of the Great Scarlet Woman. This story has been passed down through countless generations, retelling the critical true story, so essential and fundamental to the very foundation of healthy relationships and marriages within the cosmology of the people in the village. Long, long ago, their ancestors lived in the same ways, in perfect harmony with themselves, their partners, their families, their community, nature, and God. Until one day, everything was turned upside down by one cataclysmic event like no other event in the history of this great civilization. This is the story of the Great Scarlet Woman, which has been handed down for millennia. As the men and women were busy throughout the bustling, sprawling village, a singular shadow of a woman silently slipped out of the forest until she was revealed in her full splendor amidst the vibrant sunlight cascading down upon the village. Her name translated to the Great Scarlet in the ancient dialect of the ancestors. The color scarlet was rich in symbology and mythology of the people, representing the immense power of blood to either bind the village together or tear them apart. The Great Scarlet was the most alluring, sensual, erotic, and gorgeous woman known to man. She was not a mere mortal woman, but the curious offspring of ambitious human nature and unwieldy godly power merged together. As she walked into the village, every single man and woman immediately dropped what they were doing, instantly stunned, captivated, and mesmerized into a deep trance by the overwhelming magnetism of the Great Scarlet. She hardly wore any covering, but the intricate and delicate lacing ran elegantly along the curves of her hips, accentuating the perfectly proportioned arch of her lower back and voluptuous breasts in a way that awoke the primal mating drive and overwhelming sexual urges deep within every man whom she brushed by. The women also marveled at her grace, elegance, and sex appeal. All the women were unbelievably curious about Scarlet, while simultaneously feeling extremely threatened, vulnerable, and disempowered by what she represented to their men. Her skin was soft and smooth as the finest silk. Her youth glowed, glistened, and radiated in the reflection of the sunlight like the most beautiful pearls, as the rays kissed, played, and danced along her shimmering golden skin. As you drew closer, you could make out fine specks of gold dust glittering across her arms, legs, belly, and face. The rose blush on her cheeks, the graceful arch on her lower back, and the succulent curves of her hips, breasts, and thighs emitted the tantalizing fragrance, intoxicating pheromones, and juicy nectar of ripe fertility. As she made eye contact with every mesmerized man within the village, an undeniable desire and a ravenous hunger awakened deep within the most primal nature, beckoning and begging to be unleashed in all its wild ferocity. It was not only her unparalleled beauty which paralyzed the men in a ravenous trance of desire. It was also the way she knew how to move her body. None of the men in the village had ever imagined or witnessed a woman who could move her body in such a sensual and sexually evocative manner. Every move she made was like a perfectly choreographed dance, which drew the men closer to her, like the welcoming petals of a gorgeous flower, luring the bees to the rich pollen laden within. The men contorted and writhed in ecstatic yearning as they helplessly observed the way her gorgeous body formed the sexiest postures, positions, and curves as she walked, sat, or laid down. Adding the final touch of fire to the explosive desire building within the men, her hypnotic voice stunned them all, fixating them in a deep trance where they could think of nothing else but her. They were entirely possessed, desperately haunted, and ceaselessly pursued by the tantalizing fantasy of how she would sound while making love with her. But the most powerful and addictive characteristic of the Great Scarlet was her ability to shapeshift into exactly the form each individual man desired in the deepest and most primal recesses of their imagination. She was the perfect sexual mate for every single man in the village. If a man most deeply yearned for an exotic brunette with dark skin, or a blonde with fair skin and blue eyes, Scarlet would shift her body to burrow and sear deep into the minds of each man in the village. Petite or voluptuous, short or tall, elegant or athletic, Scarlet could read the minds of every individual man she gazed into and instantly shift into the perfect dream of a woman that every man most deeply yearned and burned for sexually. The men could not believe what they were seeing. One by one, all the men in the village were swept off their feet by the gorgeous and sexy Great Scarlet. Scarlet could also shapeshift into the form of the sexiest dream body of a man, which every woman yearned for deep within their primal calling. But there was a significant rift between how the women reacted to Scarlet versus how the men behaved. While initially almost all the women were curious about Scarlet and attracted to the man she could shapeshift into, most of the women were not obsessed with Scarlet. They began to lose interest rapidly, preferring to focus on their real male partners, as well as their own health, balance, imagination, and empowerment. The women were deeply connected to the light of God and were highly intelligent. They knew that true happiness came from the deeply bonding and connected behaviors with their true love in life, their very own partner. They knew that their own power of imagination and their own sexual potency was much stronger in real-life sexual experiences and encounters than chasing the fantasy of a purely sexual affair with the Great Scarlet. They were well aware from the start that they did not even know who Scarlet really was on an intellectual, mind and soul level. The women began to notice changes in the men, even as the men could not see it. Their obsession for Scarlet continued to grow day after day within the minds of the men, as long as she remained in the village. At first, the women noticed concerning signs. For the first time in their relationships and marriages, the women noticed that their male partner would fail to make eye contact and had lost the joyous, satisfied smile and glimmer in their eyes, which told the women that their man was in love with them. It tugged and tore at the women's hearts when they witnessed their partners were no longer able to psychically connect with them. They no longer finished each other's sentences. The men showed less and less interest in deep eye gazing, conscious communication, caressing, embracing, holding, and kissing, preferring instead to mechanically pursue sex and semen release while appearing to be thinking of someone else. The women were absolutely correct. The men were thinking of someone else during sex. It was the Great Scarlet. The men imagined they were with Scarlet. The men thought of Scarlet constantly, every day. Their obsession and addiction with wanting to have sex with Scarlet grew in its ferocity and grip on the men. The men were all losing their inherent powers to this growing desire for Scarlet. Their work, hobbies, passions, and relationships were all rapidly deteriorating. Their drive, determination, motivation, inspiration, and willpower were rapidly diminishing. Their desire, yearning, and arousal for their real partner were all rapidly depleting as they focused and replaced all their neurology and sexual energy with their real partners for the fantasy of having sex with the great scarlet woman. Every man in the village became increasingly distant from their partners, withdrawing deep into their own secret hideouts within the forest, the hills, or the mountains. There, the men would attempt to best recreate an image of the great scarlet. Some men took the most beautiful shades of ochres from the cliffs to draw images of Scarlet and pretend they could finally have sex with her. Others created life-size replicas with wood carvings, metal sculptures, woven or clothed figurines to attempt to recreate their perfect image of Scarlet and to proceed to masturbate to semen release while imagining they were finally having sex with the great Scarlet, the woman of their deepest sexual desires. Day after day, month after month, and year after year, the men marched like zombies deep into the dark crags and crevices of their minds to recreate the sexual experience with Scarlet. At the very moment they released their semen to the elaborate images they had created of Scarlet in their mind, a deep depression, guilt, and fatigue would wash over them as they fell deeper and deeper into lethargy, fatigue, mood imbalance, isolation, and disempowerment. The harder they tried to experience the ultimate feeling of finally having sex with the gorgeous great Scarlet, the farther that reality drifted away, leaving them stranded, hopeless, and depleted. Over the years and decades of this ceaseless addictive behavior, most of the men began to lose their ability to perform sexually at night with their partners. Many men even preferred to masturbate to Scarlet than to actually make love with their partners anymore. Other men noticed that they were even losing their ability to masturbate to their elaborate images of Scarlet they had created. They had to resort to an endless process of tweaking and accentuating certain aspects of Scarlet and imagine scenarios which surpassed their normal sexual fantasies. The men became physically weak and began to lose their magnetism, scent, essence, power, energy, mind, and soul to the impossible and insatiable quest to have sex with the great Scarlet. The women tried everything they could to attract the men to them, but they were no match for the overwhelming power emanating from the great Scarlet woman, which had captivated the men of the village for decades. The women were devastated because they intuitively knew they were losing their men to the great Scarlet, but there was nothing they could do about it. They tried telling their partners that they needed to stop worshiping Scarlet, but it was always the same story. The men denied that they had any interest in Scarlet, only to secretly engage in graphic sexual fantasies of having sex with Scarlet to the point of climax and semen release every single day. For the first time in the long storied history of the ancient village, some women finally decided to leave the men after trying everything they could to salvage the relationship and marriage. This harbored in the period known to the ancient village as a time of great delusion, sorrow, and a falling from grace. The women mourned and grieved over the loss of their partners, but the men they had fallen in love with were not the same men anymore. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to catch the next video.